Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to BearingPoint BearingPoint Talks. We have today a very snowing day in Bucharest. We will speak about threat hunting, buzzword or necessity, with our guests. Curran is a senior director leading Monroe Partners cybersecurity consulting practice. A global leader in cybersecurity, Sean has assisted organizations across most industry sectors to reduce their likelihood of a breach and meet their cybersecurity and business objective. A lot to read about Sean. Over the past 20 years, this is why we have a lot. Sean has led various cybersecurity and infrastructure consulting engagements, including breach investigations with corporate and government agencies, pen tests, security and IT strategy, and roadmap development, compliance assessments and remediation, as well as security tool operationalization. He has experience designing secure networks, applications, and corporate environments, as well as helping clients adhere to industry and government compliance frameworks, including PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, and ISO 27K. At Monroe, Sean leads the pre-transaction cybersecurity and infrastructure due diligence, carve-out, and integration analysis team, which includes IT operational, organizational governance analysis, software as a service product and infrastructure analysis, as well as market and product analysis of cybersecurity tools and organization. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks very much for having me.
Rich, our second guest, is a senior principal in Monroe Partners technology practice, specializing in cybersecurity. He has more than 15 years of executive leadership, strategy, sales, and business development experience, ranging from large global corporations to startup companies. An accomplished advisor and entrepreneur, Rich Skinner has been at the leading edge of innovation his entire career. He brings a unique blend of experience in cybersecurity, analytics, big data, Internet of Things, market intelligence, digital marketing, software as a service, and cloud computing to clients using technology to drive growth and market advantage. Rich serves on the executive committee for the U.S. Secret Service Electronic Crimes Task Force and is a regular speaker at industry conferences. Rich joined Monroe, actually in 2018.
Correct.
After serving as an executive advisor and consultant to high-tech and innovative companies on cybersecurity, risk management, physical security, and other strategic issues. His prior experience includes IBM, where he was responsible for worldwide mainframe risk and security strategies and solutions, as well as a variety of roles with Ernst & Young, State Farm, Caterpillar, CNA Insurance, and 2 startup security and risk management companies. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, let me allow to take some air after these descriptions. So everybody now speaks about threat hunting. And I imagine myself, for example, in the past, if we were speaking about incident management, we were going home and we could see our window broken, and that's incident management. So you enter your house and you try to find out what happened, why your window is broken or your door is broken. Now with threat hunting, I think we go home, we open the door, nothing is outside that indicates a compromise, and we start to look under the table, behind the doors, just in case we are compromised already. So my question is, threat hunting is just a new buzzword or is real? Sean?
Yeah, I think it's an evolution rather than a new buzzword. So it's the evolution of security. Many organizations have been relying on tools and techniques to alert them to risk. And as you say, the glass door broken or the window broken tells me an intruder is already inside the house. With threat hunting, it's the recognition that we don't always have that visible, alert to something happening. And so we want to start looking for it. And I think it's just an evolution in the way in which we think about it. It also is a way in which we bring full circle on the tools and techniques that we put in place. The ability to take the security angle of what's happening in your environment and look for something new and then inform your security tools so that they're adjusted or better capable of finding it in the future.
Okay, so I imagine you go to your, I don't know, customers like CXO, CO, CIO, even CISO, and you try to explain to them what is this threat hunting service. When they have already an incident, they will call you. That's for sure. They know what they need. But when you just want to promote the services of threat hunting, what do you tell them? What are the measurable benefits, outcomes of your threat hunting service?
Yeah, good question. And good morning, afternoon, evening for those listening in. It's definitely snowing here in Bucharest. It's getting close to Christmas, so it's the whole ambiance is perfect to be over here. But I agree with Sean. It's definitely an evolution of the cybersecurity industry itself. And I've heard certain strategists, certain industry leaders speak about it's not a matter of if someone's in your environment, it's a matter of when someone's going to be in there. And it's all about risk management. And if you can reduce the amount of time that someone's in your environment itself, you can then minimize the loss, minimize the damage that someone's going to do in your organization itself. So to those C-level leaders, if you talk about risk, if you talk about losing shareholder value, they're going to understand that language and understand that if you can minimize the impact, minimize the loss, that threat hunting will show value across the enterprise.
So these leaders now are somehow aware of the pen testing activity. So they might say, okay, and I remember that even last week I had an assignment and somebody said, okay, did you do the pen test for our applications? No, I didn't do it. So people think about pen testing like the way to find the vulnerabilities and to exploit those vulnerabilities. What are the intersection between pen testing and threat hunting, and how can we explain it? Because there is an intersection.
Absolutely. So you've got to look at it this way. If you think of pen testing as could someone break into my house? Well, once you know that they can, and once a pen test has been successful, what next? If a pen tester can break in, then what's to say someone hasn't already used the same technique to break into your environment and is dwelling within the environment looking for opportunities to either exfiltrate data or cause some kind of disruption. So the pen test proves that it can happen. Therefore, the threat hunt becomes almost I have to do it now to tell me that there hasn't already been someone else using those same tools and techniques to break into my environment. So if you're doing a pen test and it's successful, it's a natural evolution that you think about doing the threat hunt to confirm that it hasn't been exploited.
Okay, so now I imagine the incident security management team. And I have a good friend, he said sometimes that I'm a pen tester, I don't need to know how to secure the environment because I'm just a hacker. Okay,
Yep.
and he was right. Now SOC teams have some difficulties because they need to identify the root cause of their events, the security incidents that may come from the CM solution, for example. And SOC teams have difficulty in identifying the root cause of those events. Mm-hmm. Now, with threat hunting, I imagine that we need to find the root cause of something that didn't happen yet. Isn't this difficult for the SOC team?
Yeah, I would look at it a different way. I don't know about didn't happen yet. It's all about looking at what's outside normal business operating mode. So it's looking at what has changed, what's different, what has kind of affected the environment that's not normal overall. And when you look at a threat hunt itself, and don't just focus on outsiders getting in. You can also encourage individuals to look at insiders, because there's a huge insider threat across organizations, and a threat hunt can look across both sides of the fence, both internally and externally itself.
Yeah, and to that, I think you've got to look at it in terms of the SIM is a tool I put in place, hopefully, to allow me to know that something's occurred. The threat hunt is there to confirm that it's actually operating effectively.
Okay, so do you use the CM tools, for example, for threat hunting, the events generated by CM? They might not contain a lot of devices in the infrastructure because they need to pay licenses for that. They don't have maybe the right size of the security team to analyze everything, even if the events are correlated or not. So you use those logs for the CM or even the CM solution?
Whatever's available. If someone's got a SIM solution and they're taking all of the logs from all of their devices into that enterprise logging system, absolutely, it's the best source of truth, and it's also the most historical data that you're going to get. But if it's not available, direct to the source, go to the devices. I think the important thing around threat hunting is recognizing that there is a lot of information that tells me how a breach occurred. Right, I'll go back to all the tools and techniques that exist. They're all looking for what we already know is a method to breach the environment. A threat hunt is about looking for what you don't know. It's the unknown unknowns. So think of it in terms of, I've got a incident, and you mentioned that a little earlier. I've got an incident. I know an attacker has done X. My tools have told me. What else has it done, right? And that's the thing, is threat hunting is about identifying what else may have occurred. So you can use threat hunting in conjunction with incident response to try and identify the extent of the breach or the extent of the compromise.
Yeah, and I would agree. Threat hunting, it's hard to give a prescriptive description of how to threat hunt itself. You really have to understand the business and understand how the business operates, and then look at the outliers outside of the business in order to see what's outside of the normal operating mode itself.
So in this context, can this threat hunting be somehow fully automatic?
It can never be fully automatic. Otherwise, it's just another tool.
It's just another tool. So,
yeah.
So you still need some skills for the threat hunting teams, like, I don't know, pen testing, forensics. Which are the best skills for a threat hunter?
It's a mix of both, actually. All right. I think the forensics and the breach investigation skills teach you how to look for things. All right. They teach you. And go back to your point you said earlier, the pen testers don't know how to fix the environment necessarily. They know how to break in, right? That's a methodology, and you've got to think like an attacker. So when you're threat hunting, you're thinking about how would an attacker do this? What would they do next after they've drop a tool onto the environment? Where would they go next? And so you're following some of those breadcrumbs. So you need to have a background in pen testing to know what methods the attackers could exploit or utilize. You need to have that knowledge of how things occur. And then the breach investigation side helps you to understand how best to find that information. There's certain ways in which we can investigate that pen testers don't even know exist. And so bridging that gap gives you the ability to think outside of the norm and start to identify different ways in which an attack can occur that your tools or techniques don't today have the capability of detecting.
So you need, my understanding that you need to understand the pen tester way, like even a kill chain and so on. So in this context, platforms like Mitro does really help threat hunter team?
It does.
Do you use it in your?
Yeah, the MITRE attack. Yeah, absolutely. So that tells us some of the techniques that have been used in the past, and that helps to inform you as to what you may not have visibility into it. I mean, everyone today, as they invest in tools, have a limited budget. Nobody can afford to spend as much money in the tool side as they wish, and so you've got to recognise that leaves gaps, right? And understanding which of the MITRE attack framework methods that you're not able to detect today may be the source of where you start looking for your insider attacks or your external attacks as part of a threat hunt.
And I imagine somebody that needs to identify something like a zero-day threat. It's practically impossible if you don't have some threat intel feeds, but if it's a 0 day, actually you don't have threat intel feeds.
Correct.
Can a threat hunter identify, with some luck maybe, or some process, some 0 day threats?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think they can. And going back to, who's the ideal person to put in the threat hunting role, definitely pen testing, breach investigation helps. But going back to how the business operates, if you're looking for a 0 day, you have to understand what's outside of the normal operation itself. So if you see something that doesn't look right, or doesn't smell right, definitely investigate it. In order to get that thought leadership or that really industry knowledge, you have to know business functions, business processes. Let's say you're a US-based company, but you have employees that are traveling across the world. All of a sudden you have a login from, let's say, Romania, where we are today.
Hopefully you'll not remain this because of the snow.
That's right.
We'll see how we get stuck here, but
Yeah, but hopefully our security operations center is popping up and saying, hey, there's somebody logging in from Romania right now onto our internal email system. Actually, three of us, because three of us are over here.
Yep.
Hopefully you are in Bucharest and not in Râmnicu Vâlcea, which is the hackers' view.
No,
at least hopefully the connections are not coming from there.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's something actually we need to go back and check with our security operations team to say, hey, have you guys seen an alert here? Have you seen that someone else has logged in from across the world and accessing some of our sensitive information?
The other thing I'll add to this is it's not dissimilar to fraud analysis that we see in the banking market. All right, if you think about credit card fraud, organisations have been years trying to find the intersection of a credit card data breach, and they're using fraud analytics to determine that. Threat hunting uses some of those same concepts. What is normal? What is, and Rich said this best, what's baseline? What's baseline operations? If someone is connecting to a workstation as an administrator, is that normal or is it abnormal? Attackers today are using much more, a lot more techniques that are not necessarily visible. So when people talk about 0 day, they're typically talking about a piece of malware.
Yep.
What we're really looking for isn't just malware. We're looking for 0 day techniques, a technique that hasn't been used previously as a means of being able to compromise. So, you know, if you go back 4 or 5 years ago, before pass the hash existed as a technique of elevating privileges, identifying a pass the hash could be because suddenly your logs are filled up with new NTLM requests that, you know, are different from everything else. So baseline authentication may be on NTLM version 2, and suddenly you're seeing NTLM version 1 connections. That would be something a threat hunter would, to Rich's point, determine as unusual. It's something outside of normal operations or behaviour, and so that's how you can identify a 0 day technique.
So you first of all, you need to be continuously updated with a new type of techniques that might be also published. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, creating a new domain controller in an infrastructure. You've seen a Black Hat session, I think, this year.
Yep.
This presentation. But the idea is that you still need something like end user behavior analysis, I think. These solutions, EUBA solutions, can somehow compensate the threat hunting process for people that cannot afford the threat hunt team?
I think you'll find the deployment of those tools and operationalization of those tools are going to cost a lot more than a threat hunt. By the time I pay for the licensing, by the time I put enough taps into the network to be able to identify all of that lateral communication between systems, it's going to cost me more than it's going to take to undertake a threat hunt. The difference is, with those technologies, you're going to have a more proactive measure as opposed to, in some ways, while threat hunting is proactive in nature, it's still reactive in terms of the timeline that you can utilize. So I think those tools are good, and it's certainly helping to increase the visibility within an environment. But again, a good attacker utilizes normal business operations to compromise the environment. If I have your credentials, and I've got the credentials for a domain admin, everything I do from that point on looks like any other behavior a domain admin would do. So behavioral analytics aren't necessarily going to pick up on it, because creating a new domain controller is an activity that a domain admin would do. Logging onto a server, right, using RDP is an activity a domain admin would do. So the question is, do you have enough information to be able to identify that domain admin wasn't doing that at the time? And without context, none of those tools can truly identify the unusual behavior.
Yeah, and that goes back to your question about can you automate a threat hunt? And I would say, I don't think you can ever automate a threat hunt itself. It goes back to the whole artificial intelligence. I mean, can machines take over the world? Can computers function like like normal humans?
If you ask Elon Musk, they can.
Yeah. But the answer is no, because it comes down to business context itself. And that's really the differentiator, and that's really what makes the best threat hunting techniques is understanding that context itself.
Yeah. And that context is not in the machine.
And usually it's not your context.
No.
Because if you are not part of that organization.
Correct.
Well, a good threat hunter spends the time to learn the context.
Yep.
So what's normal, what's a important server versus an unimportant server? What's normal behavior for your domain admins? How do they typically operate? Do they work certain shifts or certain hours? Part of the role of the threat hunter isn't just to look at the digital world, the electronic world, it's to look at the physical as well. And that's something that no amount of machine learning and no tool or technology can truly augment or be augmented with is the physical.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, if you're a pen tester, your goal is to break in to this environment. You don't care about the business context. You're just trying to run through this wall, and you're trying to break down the wall, and let's try to get in as fast as we can. And I guess that's what differentiates really the threat hunting itself, is kind of that whole business context you wrap around that.
One question. So, are there customers? You said about these domain admins, escalating privileges. There are organizations that now implement red forest structures, Active Directory domains tiering, where the domain admins don't have access to usual normal workstations in order for the others to capture the hash.
Mm-hmm.
Can organization just implement a lot of defense in depth layers and be safe, or they should be concerned?
I think the concept of defense in depth in and of itself helps to reduce the likelihood of the ability for an attacker to pivot once they've made contact. I think you can certainly put a lot of deterrence in that makes it unviable for an attacker to be successful, but it's not impossible. Go back to Rich's point before, the insider threat still exists. What if I pay someone to do that activity for me? What if I pay someone to open up that communications channel? There are multiple different ways, and they're the things you can't necessarily identify with tools and techniques, is the person who's been paid off. So I think, yes, I can put defense in depth in place, but it's not going to protect against every time an attack. So it really comes down to the business and understanding the risk profile of the organization, what the attackers would find to be valuable, whether that's the monetization of information, whether that's the monetization of availability, whether that's the monetization of resources, and then recognizing that as much investment as I can put in place, the attackers will always find a way around that investment. And so, how much money are you going to spend?
Yeah,
Right.
to scale the security until some point that,
If you're US Defense Forces, we're seeing even CIA, NSA hacks. We're seeing Snowden being able to take data out of the environment. And some of the information coming back on that, involved him literally turning off his computer, pulling out the hard drive and copying the data directly off the hard drive so that the operating system had no visibility. In fact, there was a really interesting component around understanding how those types of attacks were occurring to get around the tools that were in place to detect it. And so thinking about those, you can't just rely on the tools, and you can't put enough investment in place. Even these super top secret environments, with endless budgets to protect their environments are still susceptible to attack and still susceptible to risk. And so if they don't have enough money, then the manufacturing company down the road definitely isn't going to be.
Yep. Yeah, and I agree with Sean. I mean, just look across the industry itself. One of the industry standard, I would say, cybersecurity reports on data breaches itself is the Verizon data breach report. And they had some statistics in there that the average threat is inside environments for over months at a time. And I would probably argue 6 months plus, maybe years for some environments itself. And just knowing that that's going on across the industry and seeing all these attacks and data exfiltration, I mean, threat hunting is definitely a proactive approach that's needed across the industry.
Financial services spends, according to Gartner research, around 17% of their investment of their IT budget on security. The next nearest industries are in the 4 to 5%. Right. So thinking about it from that standpoint, how much money is the cost benefit? At what point do I say I've invested enough for the type of risk I'm trying to mitigate? And that's the argument that most organisations come across. So you've got to look at it if I had all of the time in the world and all of the investment in the world and the perfect environment that never changes, I could probably secure it. But as soon as I introduce change, as soon as I introduce people, as soon as I introduce business processes and the need to get things done, the convenience of doing work, I'm going to break down security controls. And convenience is the number one reason security controls get broken.
Yeah, and there are many controls with many weaknesses, so you can find a way.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
If you need more context about the organization, isn't better to have an internal threat hunting team, even if it's more expensive?
We're starting to see certain organisations invest in it. So high-tech organisations that you would think about have absolutely built threat hunting teams. The challenge for most is how much am I going to spend threat hunting, and how often am I going to keep them there? And do they become stagnant? Right? How do they learn about new tools and techniques if all they're ever doing is threat hunting? And that's why we talk about it in the context of a threat hunter can't necessarily just be a threat hunter. That background in penetration testing, that background in forensic investigations provides the threat hunter more capabilities and more knowledge around where to look. And if I built a team that's sole purpose in life is threat hunting, where are they developing that new information and that new knowledge? That's the challenge for most of them, is how do I remain relevant? Then I have the challenge of it's expensive, and those resources are going to get poached. If they're really that good, why wouldn't someone else try and invest in them? So you may spend a lot of money in an investment as an organisation building a threat hunter who themselves get bored and start looking for new opportunities, and someone's going to come along and offer them more money.
And please.
Yeah, and looking at the industry and how it's really transforming, there's a term being thrown out as threat hunting as a service, meaning it's not a one-time initiative, then you're done. It's it's a continuous health check on the environment, a continuous way to look inside your environment and make sure that things are not out of place. So back to your comment on would inside teams be the best? I would say if you have unlimited budget, absolutely. But due to from Sean's comments, I mean these guys are highly sought after, high skill set, definitely technical expertise, and it's just a challenge really to employ someone like that itself. So across the industry, threat hunting as a service, you come up with a baseline because you understand the business, and we encourage our threat hunting team, and we enforce them to meet with the business leader, meet with certain business leaders, and meet with folks who really know their environment so they can understand more of that context around the initiative.
You're right that I had in my team a pen tester, a very, very good pen tester, many years before, and he got bored because he was doing just web pen testing for our apps.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Now he moved out, and he has his own company, and he's doing pen tests even for Tesla systems. Okay,
yep.
Because you need to improve and to be challenged all the time.
It's career equity. You've got to provide career equity, and that's the challenge when you employ a team. Is if the organisation is employing a team to do one function, then where's the career equity for that individual? Where's their ability to grow and become more valuable, right? And that's honestly where people will start to fall in, is a threat hunter is someone who wants challenges. I mean, we call it hunting. It's another term for this is compromise assessment. It's not sexy enough, right? We call it threat hunting because we're people that want to we want to be challenged. We want to hunt for something. We've got that fire in our belly to look for something, and you can't do that with employees and keep that fire in their belly forever.
I have extra questions for you. However, I think we should also take questions from the audience. I would start with people in the room. We have quite several people for this weather in the room. We have a microphone for this. First one. Can you just, yeah.
Hello. So thanks for the talk. My question would be, because we are talking about threats, and usually we are thinking of external threats, but how would you go deeper into the internal threats, like some persons, some networks, and so on? So that would be the question, because usually the topic is on external threats, external hackers, external people. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Threats, irrespective of whether they're internal or external, really about motivation. External threats are easier to understand because there is a motivation. If I steal data, I can monetize that data. You know, depending on the organisation, I could have cyber warfare, you know, for organisations in government and the like. For an insider threat, it's quite often more about personal motivation. And so understanding the personal motivations of individuals is one part. The second is understanding what access they have and therefore what would allow them to monetize that, right? So, you know, it's always difficult to think negatively about employees, right? We employ them, we give them a certain amount of trust, we want to believe that our trust is being rewarded, and so that's why an external threat hunter can often take away that emotion part. Less emotion, think about it objectively and identify those, whereas an internal team, that emotion still exists. It's the, I can't do that to a person or an individual. So it is difficult, it's hard, it's always hard to find the insider threat, but there is still footprints everywhere, all right? And often those footprints are more obvious because those insiders are thinking about it from a personal side of things. It's typically for financial gain because of something going wrong in their life. They're not thinking about how they clean up after themselves. They're not thinking about how they, you know, remove the fingerprints or the trace elements of what they're doing, unless they're really sophisticated.
Yeah, and insiders, let's say employees or even contractors you bring in, I mean, these are some of your most important assets to your organization. I mean, these are folks that have the institutional knowledge really on how your organization works and are able to function the business on a day-to-day environment. They're also your best intelligence source if something's going wrong, that they can say, hey, this doesn't look right. You know, something's out of place, something, there could be some threat in this environment. But on the flip side, like you said, this is also could be your biggest adversary or your biggest threat itself, just because they know all that information and they can potentially cover up as many tracks as they think they can cover up themselves. They could work together with a team inside your environment. So yeah, threat hunting should not be focused just externally. It should be across the organization, internally, externally, business partners, digital supply chain, who are your vendors. I mean, it should look across your complete environment.
Are there any other questions from the, okay.
Bogdan here from the Bucharest Security Advisory Team. Can you share with us any successful story where a company prevented an adverse persistent threat through pen testing?
Through pen testing or threat hunting?
Sorry, through threat hunting.
Yeah, without going into company names, a number of the major breaches that were announced in the US have actually become discovered as a result of a threat hunt. It's not because the attackers did anything wrong. It was a threat hunt identified the attack and began to work to turn it into an investigation. So, you know, some of the healthcare insurance breaches of 2 or 3 years ago in the US were discovered as a result of threat hunting. It wasn't as a result of any other indicator to the environment. So there's plenty of success stories associated with a threat hunt, identifying a breach and being able to thwart that. I go back to what Rich said earlier, is the dwell time, or what we call the dwell time between when an attacker makes entry into the environment and when they finalise whatever attack it is, whether that's exfiltration of data, whether that's, you know, today the more increasingly the ransomware-based attacks, it can be 6, 8, 12 months. And so the earlier in that life cycle that you're detecting it, the most likely you're going to be to minimize the damages. If I detect a breach, and we've seen that with some of the others, with some of the ones more recently, if I detect it in month 3 and they're siphoning off credit card data, well, now they've got 3 months of data and not 12, right? So the earlier in that life cycle I can detect it is going to minimize the amount of damage that could have possibly been done before you found out in some other method. So there's definitely a lot of success stories. I can't go into company names because we're involved in supporting some of those companies, but we've definitely seen it, and we ourselves have been successful in minimising the impact of an attack as a result of threat hunts that we've identified in environments.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Sean said, and I would complement that with the best threat hunts are the ones we don't hear about, that we don't hear about on the news externally, because we actually found the attacker in the environment before they are able to create a breach or extract data itself. We prevent that, we stop that from happening itself. So think of this as you're going to the doctor as a checkup or on a continual basis, more of a proactive approach in that you want to find things early so you can minimize the damage and minimize the risk itself.
Yep.
We have also.
I have one more question.
Please.
What kind of people do you need in a threat hunting team? What areas of expertise do you cover?
We typically augment our team with security professionals and IT professionals, application infrastructure related people. And the reason for that is you not only need to understand how the business operates, we talked about that before, but you also need to understand how IT systems typically operate. Understanding how normal authentication authorization requests happen in Windows. Most pen testers don't necessarily understand that. You need to get insights into that, and that's where your Windows team can give you a better understanding, or your Linux team can give you a better understanding. So we will typically augment the team with infrastructure related resources. If there is some kind of application environment that we think is valuable, we may augment it with application related resources. In addition to the security team. So it gives us a greater insight or greater capability of understanding what normal behaviour is and what abnormal behaviour might be.
Yeah, and we look for individuals that have intimate knowledge of the certain environments that we're working with. By intimate knowledge, I mean if someone's running Office 365, we don't want to put someone on that environment that's never seen that before or that only knows Exchange itself because that's internal. We want someone that knows Office 365, that's set it up, that knows the configuration settings, that knows kind of how it's supposed to operate on a day-to-day basis. So every threat hunt, we try to pull from resources within our organization on folks that know that environment itself. Someone's running Salesforce. Okay, let's get someone from our Salesforce team to be involved in the environment to kind of know the normal transactions that take place there.
We have also an online question. I think it's quite aligned with the others. How large is a threat hunting team usually? Okay, maybe.
Yeah, it depends on the size of the environment. Obviously, we're going into the amount of time that we're given to do that. Our smallest threat hunts are typically done pre-close on a due diligence transaction, and they can be as short as a week. They're the very small ones, and the team will be typically 3 or 4 people. The larger ones could involve a team of 10 or 15 if we've got a fairly large environment. But ultimately, it really comes down to, and Rich said this best, the intimacy component. You've got to have people who know how to communicate. You've got to have people who have a certain specialisation or skill that they're bringing to the table. And so a good pen testing team is somewhere in the vicinity of 3 to 7 people.
Okay, quite large,
Can be.
really. And is this actually can be mixed with the incident management in the SOC or how?
You can, yeah. You can certainly draw on resources across the board if someone's got that specialised knowledge. Rich said it before, Office 365 is where we're seeing a lot of compromises more recently. And so we've been bringing our Office 365 team in to help us to do that. When we're trying to extract information out of both Office 365, it's now a lot of PowerShell. So I may bring a PowerShell developer to the table, someone who can truly automate the effort that we're going to identify a compromise. So it may be 7 people, but it's not 7 people full time. It may be, hey, I need someone to write me a couple of PowerShell scripts to pull certain information that I haven't had access to before. And that may be 2 or 3 days of work of getting the PowerShell scripts together. So there is a lot of fluid nature to the compromise team.
Yeah, and looking at large organizations that have worldwide presence, let's say we have an office here in Romania, office back home in Chicago. Depends how in depth you want to go with your threat hunt itself. I mean, you could have your resources on site at the different office locations. You could look at your central data center facilities. You can look at your regional offices. You can look at your business partner offices themselves. So it's really how deep you want to go itself. And by completing or initializing your first threat hunt, you really understand that landscape and really how big your attack surface can potentially be.
Yeah, it's quite possible you're taking a very small snapshot of the environment. You may be looking at one particular region and then looking at how I go to the other regions post that. It also depends on how distributed your IT team is. As Rich said, if you've got IT teams in Romania that are responsible for local office support, then you may have to have local office resources with the language skills to be able to ask the right questions.
So if there are no more questions, I have just the last one for you.
Okay.
If we have to invest in a threat hunting team with 7 people, I think the pressure from the management will be quite high because you pay very skilled professionals and maintain those professionals. And I mean not investing in external services, it's your own team.
Yep.
So the KPIs will be important. Can you name the most important KPI, not all of them?
Chargeability. I think that's what your management will tell you every time, and we all work for the same industry, right? Chargeability is king. I go back to what we said before, though. Your threat hunting team of 7 people isn't necessarily 7 threat hunters. And so keeping them busy, keeping them satisfied in their job, that career equity aspect, isn't necessarily about them doing threat hunting for all of their days. And my PowerShell guys that may be involved in the project may be doing work in O365 environments next week for a different client in a different world, and I bring them in to one threat hunt every 6 months. So you can build a team of multi-talented people who aren't just threat hunting 24/7, right, or 365 days a year. That team and that fluid nature of it, of using specialized resources to augment the team, will allow you to maintain that KPIs and to meet the normal business, acceptable business operating norms of chargeability and financial viability of the resources.
Yeah, it's an interesting question you bring up. I mean, it can be compared to insurance. Why do you buy insurance if you never have a loss? Why do you pay for health insurance if you never have to go to the emergency room? It's threat hunting, in my opinion, is going to become a normalcy kind of across the enterprise, something that you must do in order to show your board of directors, to show your shareholders that, hey, we're actively looking for potential threats within our environment itself. Because at the end of the day, we're all about increasing shareholder value by reducing risk across the enterprise.
And every board of director wants to know, have I been compromised? Should I be able to sleep at night? A pen test doesn't tell me that. A pen test tells me if it's possible.
If it's possible, yes.
Right?
Yes.
My tools and techniques and the amount of viruses we stopped last week doesn't tell me if it got further. It doesn't tell me what I don't know. Threat hunting has more of an opportunity to tell the board what you don't know.
Agreed.
Thank you. We are reaching our limit for this podcast in a matter of time only. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Rich, for your presence here. We've learned a lot of things today. Now, when I will enter my house, I will look under the table and behind the doors, of course, because this is a new evolution in my way of being secure at home. But also, I do recommend the others to implement threat hunting services or to grow their own teams if they can, if they have enough money for this type of services, to see what is after the break-in, not if they can break in.
Correct.
Thank you, everybody, for the physical presence here and the online presence. The upcoming talks will be communicated on our website, bearingpoint.com/talks. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Yep.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.